Hey, welcome to the podcast, Game Changers. I'm fortunate to have leadership coach, former military, highly respected coach, Jan Rutherford with me. Jan, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Jeff. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah,
Appreciate the
good, great
invite.
to have you. And before we get started, I want to thank my sponsor. My sponsor is Magic Mind, the world's first productivity drink, if I can say that correctly.
Mm.
It is just a little 2-ounce drink of magic that you take in the morning. It's green and it kind of looks sort of suspicious, but it tastes great and it's full of all kinds of antioxidants and vitamins and keeps you energized and focused throughout the day. So thanks to Magic Mind for sponsoring Game Changers. And you can find Magic Mind at magicmind.com. Get your own serving of that magic power every morning. So Jan Rutherford, Jan comes with us joins us from Colorado, the scenic, beautiful state right outside of Denver. And Jan is an executive coach and keynote speaker with numerous online courses on LinkedIn, Skillsoft, and Udemy. Am I pronouncing that correctly? Udemy?
Yep.
A former Green Beret and founder of Self-Reliant Leadership, he leads Crucible wilderness expeditions with executives and veterans. That sounds so intriguing to me. And thank you for your service.
You're welcome.
He's the co-host of the Leadership Podcast and author of The Littlest Green Beret on Self-Reliant Leadership. His next book, called Becoming a Self-Reliant Leader, How Grit and Disciplined Duty Forge Indomitable Teams. Man, I love that. Indomitable Teams. And that will be out in summer of 2024, so next summer.
Yep.
So welcome, Jan. Thank you so much for taking time to be on Game Changers. We've known each other for a short time, but you've made a tremendous impact on your clients and your community, and I've learned a lot from you already. So thank you for being here. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks for having me.
You bet. So your business is called Self-Reliant Leadership. What inspired you to start your own coaching business, and how'd you come up with the name?
I was just talking about this with my wife on a walk yesterday. I'm like, it all goes back to reading this book called The Perfect Business by Michael LeBoeuf. And it was
The Perfect Business by Michael LeBoeuf. We'll have to keep that in the show notes so people know.
It's an old book, but it was it was way ahead of its time about being a solopreneur. And I remember reading that, taking a bunch of notes, and I always knew I wanted to do what I'm doing, but I never felt like I could do it till the kids, grew up. I just, didn't feel like I could take that leap. If I'd known
Or as a risk.
Yeah.
Right? I'm right there with you.
And nobody in the family went to college. Nobody was an entrepreneur. So, I just, I didn't know what I didn't know. If I knew then what I know now, I would have certainly taken the leap sooner. But, the other thing I was saying the other day is what I've been doing since I was 19 years old really has not changed. I mean, at 19 years old, I was a Green Beret instructor. I was a sergeant. I was in front
At
of
19?
Yeah, at 19, I was in front
That's
of
very
three.
impressive.
I was young, but I would be up, on the platform, as we called it, in front of 400 students, teaching them about, basic first aid and medical. I was a Green Beret medic, so I was the, the medical instructor for students going through the course. And, I think I've been doing the same thing my whole career is trying to help develop people to learn things and then to teach things. And, that's what I've done. And I knew a long time ago that I always wanted to do this. It's
just part of who you are.
Yeah, I mean, but I knew, I did the military thing. I knew I was going to get out and go into the corporate. As soon as I got in the corporate world, I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I just didn't feel like I could take the plunge until I was older. And, so I'm so glad I did. And, it's been the most fulfilling part of my career by far.
Yeah. Well, like I said, just having known you a short time, I've learned a lot, and I can only imagine the impact that you have on the executives that you work with. Would you consider the corporate world, um, so did you think it was sort of challenging for you because you have that entrepreneurial mindset?
Yeah.
I mean, and I guess I asked that question because I was in the corporate world for
Yeah.
many years, and I found it to be really challenging because so many people had different agendas, and
Yeah.
people were self-professed leaders, but self-professed, not real
Yeah.
leaders.
Well, I always felt like a fish out of water. I mean, I did as a Green Beret. I was the youngest, littlest, smallest, most immature guy that went through the course. So I
Okay,
felt
so
like
that's hard to believe, but okay.
no, I mean, I was most of the guys were a few years older than me, and they had played sports, and they were big dudes, and I always felt a little bit like a fish out of water with those guys. Um, in the corporate world, a lot of them had grown up, a little bit with a, I'm trying to think how to say this, a little bit better pedigree. They knew how to dress, they knew how to talk, they knew how, they grew up differently than I did. And
Like they
so
were groomed for that corporate climate.
yeah, and I grew up much, very much blue collar, working class, people. I mean, I always had really cruddy jobs in high school because I didn't have nice clothes, to go get a clean job. But at the beginning of the corporate world, I found that it was really tough. And then somewhere about 5 years in, I remember somebody saying, "Hey, talk to Jan. He knows how to network better than anybody here." And I looked around and I'm like, "Who are they talking about? You mean?" And then I realized, oh, I had kind of figured this thing out. I knew how to get stuff done. And and I realized a lot of people were coming to me saying, how do you network? And I never even realized I was doing it. I just was kind of having fun figuring out how to get stuff done.
So you're
And
just a natural.
most of the people there were really, really good people. But, I also knew, as I learned more and got more confident, I realized, gosh, I'd really like to be running my own show. And, it just took me a long time to get there. But, as my wife says, I had to go through what I had to go through to get where I am now, that if I
Yep.
hadn't done all the things, and I tell people all the time, there's no such thing as a linear trajectory for a career. I had
Even if you want it
as
to be, it's
oh
not.
my gosh, I made so many mistakes and had so many, I had more failures and mistakes than successes. And, if I do have any wisdom today, it's from all those setbacks. It's not
Yeah.
from, the things that went well. And even in my little business here, there's a lot of things that we've tried to do that didn't work. I mean, a lot.
Yeah.
And
But that's how you learn, right? I mean,
yeah,
you learn from your mistakes, and you can either decide to learn from them to make the future better, or just wallow in self-pity and
yeah.
woe is me and I can't do this. But
Well,
obviously you haven't. You've taken those experiences and made something special from them.
yeah. Well, I mean, that's what we talked about so much during the pandemic is being resilient. And, it's what Tom Peters said a long time ago when he wrote In Search of Excellence. You have to be the master of bounce back ability.
Yeah.
And, I think about, that's what I did. I'm like, okay, that didn't work. Let's try this. And another great piece of advice from my wife was at the very beginning, she said, the market will tell you what it values. And the market, if you listen, will tell you what it values. And another way of
That
saying that
that
is
is
kind of,
very true.
yeah, well, it goes back to what Peter Drucker said a long time ago. If you're a consultant, you only need two questions in your toolbox. One, what business are you in? And two, who's your customer? And as an entrepreneur, as anybody in the business world and in the corporate world, you have to ask and answer those questions every single day. You
Always.
never get done asking and answering, what business am I really in? Who really is my customer?
Right.
And
Well, it
they're
sort of
hard.
evolves, right? I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
if you're really good at what you're doing and you're working with more people, get more clients, different businesses. You're always evolving. So you're
Yep.
always trying to grow and learn more, learn how to do things better. So self-reliant leadership. So how did you come up with that name?
Um,
I love that name.
well, thank you. My favorite book when I was a kid was My Side of the Mountain. It was about a fictional book about a little boy, 13 years old, who went out into the Catskills and lived by himself and carved out a tree and taught a falcon how to hunt. And I read that book a dozen times when I was a kid, and I just
Hmm.
loved the idea of being self-reliant. And when I went in the military, I realized you have to be self-reliant to be reliable. I mean, you have to be squared away to be a good leader, to take care of other people. You can't be worried about yourself all the time. You've got to be in shape and do your homework, and you got to get up earlier and stay up later. And you've got to realize it's not about you
It's
to
never
take
about
care of it.
you,
Right.
right?
But
Yeah.
but you can't do that unless you are, squared away. And squared away, I always think of, the five F's. You know, you've got, you've got fitness, you've got to be healthy, you've got family. A lot of people will say faith, spirituality, finances, and then the
Yep.
other one is fulfillment. To be,
Hmm.
happy and content and fulfilled in what you're doing, that you're passionate. If
Right.
if you're
Sort
not
of living
squared
out your
away on those,
purpose. Yeah.
yeah, if you aren't squared away on those five things, leading self, you can't lead others. And if you don't master leading others, you certainly can't lead at the organizational level, which is really about designing the environment where all the right
Oh,
behaviors happen.
so true. So true. And I know in your own business you have a set of core principles or core values that you live by and run your business by. And I too am steadfast on core values. In fact, every time I start working with a client, uh we spend the first couple of sessions just talking about their own
Hmm.
set of core values. You know,
Right.
they all have they know they have their core values. They may not have articulated them, they may not have written them down, but they have their own set of non-negotiables that they live by. So describe your own core principles and
Yeah.
of your leadership philosophy and how they've
Yeah.
guided your approach to your coaching business.
Yeah. Well, the pillars of self-reliant leadership I've mentioned, leading self, leading others, leading the organization. But what I look for in the clients I want to work with, the people that participate in our expeditions, is really three things. One is people that are selfless or trying to be selfless, that they know,
Right.
we becomes before me. So
They're
that's the
not they're
first
not
thing.
contacting you because they want to get better and improve themselves and do their own thing. It's about being well, as Simon Sinek said, leaders eat last. So,
Yeah.
it's about making sure everybody is taken care of before
Yeah.
themselves.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that goes to the second one is that they have heroic aspirations beyond power and money, that they want to make a difference in the lives of others. They want to make the world a better place in what they do. That they're continually improving, that they're, curious. The third thing is that they're adventurous. And by that I mean they're willing to take risks, to be vulnerable, to figure out how you balance confidence and humility.
Kind of
And
open yourself up, right? I
right,
mean,
yeah, to be
that's the only way
coachable.
you'll right. It's
And
the only way
that's
you'll learn and
why
get better.
it's probably why I have no narcissist clients. I don't, because I don't think a narcissist would hire a coach.
Yeah, well, they're not coachable. They
Yeah,
they have all the answers.
yeah, that's right.
Why would they need a coach?
Yeah.
Everybody should go to them for advice, right? I mean,
Yeah.
and I'm sure you've worked with a few narcissists. It's um, interesting. Lots of great learning experiences from working with a narcissist,
Yeah.
having been down that road myself.
Yeah.
So I love your core principles. I think those are so important. How do you translate those core principles then if somebody comes to you and maybe they're not totally on board yet with those core principles? How do you help them understand how important it is? Now, I'm not saying they're narcissistic at all, but
Yeah.
maybe they're not quite there in understanding what it means to be selfless.
Well, the first thing I do with clients is, again, those criteria I just mentioned are those by which I select people. So they should already possess them if I'm working with them.
Hmm.
And
And you've
but
been
the
around the block enough times, you can see whether they have it or not, right?
yeah, well, the one thing that I found as a sales leader back in the day was the two things I couldn't develop in other people was curiosity and drive. I mean that they have to come with that. And the
Lead a
same thing
horse to
goes
water, but you can't make them drink.
exactly. And what I do with clients when they come on board is the first question I'll ask is, what do you want? And that's a hard question because it kind of goes back to those five F's. You know, they want balance in their lives, they want to be fulfilled. Um, and there's not a single person that I know that's not in transition in some way, shape, or form from, where they are today and where they'd like to be. So the next thing we do is really look at what do they value? What's really important to them? And then we look at, their strengths and where those strengths serve them today and where those strengths no longer serve them, or in certain situations, those strengths detract. For example, somebody I worked with the other day said, I'm not patient. That's my vice. But my virtue
Hmm.
is I get stuff done, high energy. I've just got to know when to use the energy and when to dial it back and when to be patient.
Yeah, you
Well,
need to
that's
channel it in
pretty
the right direction.
right. And that's pretty good self-awareness. And, as Marshall Goldsmith wrote a long time ago, what got you here won't get you there. What you need to go from manager to director is different than going from director to VP, from VP to the C-suite. And it's not that we have to change who we are. We need to really just become more and more self-aware that some of our strengths serve us and some of them don't. And here's how they affect other people. And we need to be intentional and deliberate about the tone that we set with other human beings.
I love that. I love that. What do you think are some of the most common challenges that leaders are experiencing
Mm,
today? I mean, you're
mm.
working with some, big time executives, leaders of large organizations. And even some that maybe not as large of an organization, but what are some of those common challenges that they're facing
Yeah.
today?
Well, I think, not to oversimplify, but I really would put it into two buckets. One is time, is are they spending their time in the right places? Are they prioritizing properly? As I finished my book, I had three words. It was decisions determine destiny. And so
I love
a lot
that.
of what people need is they know they want to be here and they're over here. What do they need to do to cross the chasm to better allocate their time, which is absolutely something they can control. And most people will say, I want to be more strategic. Um, the second thing is really on the people side. So you have time and you have people.
Mhm.
And the people side is how can they be more effective with people? Produce more influence, whether it's managing the board, managing up, managing sideways, or their direct reports. And oftentimes that involves difficult conversations. And a lot of people have a lot of trouble with difficult conversations because they're hard, they're difficult.
Yeah.
Most of us don't like conflict, we want to avoid it. And
Even at
so,
that leadership level,
yeah. Oh,
and
yeah.
so going into a difficult conversation, what's the mindset that you suggest that we need to have?
No, good question. I think it's again goes back to curiosity. If I were to say to you, instead of coming out of a meeting saying, Jeff, gosh, you interrupted everybody in that meeting. That was terrible. Don't do that. It would go, Jeff, how do you think that meeting went? Oh, okay. Then I'm checking for your self-awareness. Hey,
Yep.
what about when you interrupted Sue? Oh, yeah, I
Mm.
did. Jeff, how do you think that made her feel? And so it's not a quick conversation. But if I have
Right.
a quick conversation, I say, Jeff, don't interrupt people. You're being a jerk. You might be compliant, but you're not going to be committed to wholesale change. If I have
Right.
a discussion with you where I'm compassionate and I demonstrate that I care about you as a human, that I want you to get better and help you see how it affects other people, then you're more likely to commit to changing your behavior.
Right.
and
Right.
developing
Because
better habits.
you're not, because the way you're presenting it is not, you're not being demeaning or, insulting in any way. You're trying to lift them up. You're trying
Yep.
to help them understand a little bit better how they have behaved and what their behavior means to
Yep.
the people that they're working with. And, so when I go into a conversation like that, it's always at the end, how are they going to walk out of this feeling better? That's the goal. How are they going to come out of this
Yep.
feeling like this was of value to them, as opposed to, well, geez, Jeff is just,
Hmm.
he's a jerk. I don't want to talk to that guy. And
Well,
then that's
you're
a challenge, but you have
well,
to
you're
really
talking
dig deep.
about you're talking about tone. That tone when we're out on the expedition, we always put different people in charge and we talk about three things: direction, pace, and tone. Direction is go to the top of the hill. Pretty simple. I mean, in business, most direction's pretty simple. Hit the number,
Right.
produce X, amount
Trend
of
in the right
widgets.
direction.
Yeah. But the thing we've struggled with, especially the last 4 years, has been pace. What's the right pace? If I'm walking out in the woods going up a hill with a bunch of people, I can go as fast as the slowest person. But when we're all working virtually, who's the slowest person? And the slowest person isn't the same person every day. It depends on the task, the mood. We're all dealing with stuff.
Yeah.
We're lucky if most people can actually put in 40 productive hours a week, given all their other responsibilities. So then the other part is the tone. When we get up to the top of the hill, we want them to be committed and energized when we say, this isn't the top. Look over there. That hill's higher. We're going over there. Now we have to go down before we go back up. Well, if you're not motivating people along the way, they're going to go, are you
Yeah,
kidding
right.
me?
Yeah.
It's
I'm
like the
tired. I don't
quarterly
want to do
objective.
that.
I
Right.
hit my
Right.
numbers. Now you're telling me to hit more numbers. So we have to be way more cognizant about how we want people to feel when they're being led by us. And it's hard because, we
So
need to
true.
balance
Yeah.
having them hit their numbers and also having a good relationship with people, and that goes
And it,
back to that pace. And
yeah,
this is the challenge of leadership today. And I'll say one more thing that it really is hard. And what I think the challenge is for today's leader is how do you personalize leadership, yet the entire team believes you're fair?
right.
Because you can't treat everybody the same.
Because
Um,
they're not the
ev-
same.
and everybody's got different circumstances. Um,
Exactly.
if there's a guy that's 55 has different needs than the 30-year-old that just had a baby, or the 45-year-old who's dealing with sick parents, or somebody that's having a mental health crisis. We can't run everybody the same all day long, 100%. We just
That-
we just can't do that. And what
Not
used
and
to
expect
motivate
good
people,
results for sure.
right? Well, 30 years ago, it was, everybody was motivated pretty much the same. I want to get promoted. I want to make more money. Now, what motivates people are really different. I mean, it kind of goes a little bit back to Dan Pink that he said years ago. It was autonomy, it was mastery, and it was purpose. But what those mean to people are really different these days.
Yeah,
And we have to
definitely.
understand that. And you have to take time to understand that from each person. You can't just say, hey, 40 people that report to me, here's what you're going to do, and I'm going to treat you all the same. It's just not going to work.
Oh, it won't. The people, you will not positively influence all 40 people if you treat them all the same, because their needs are different. They communicate differently. They're looking for different things in life. Their purpose might be different. And as a leader, you have to be sensitive to that. And you have to understand that, and you have to act accordingly. And that's what
Yeah.
makes it such a challenge. So good segue to the next question. Key attributes of a good self-reliant leader, what would you say are some of the
Mm.
more important? I mean, there's lots of important key attributes, but what would you say are the most critical?
If I had to boil it down to the thing that I think a lot of people struggle with, as leaders, is this balance of confidence and humility. We want to be confident enough to where we have a swagger, but not arrogance. And we want to be humble enough to, where we're willing to be vulnerable, where we're willing to say, I don't know, I don't understand, I'm wrong, I made a mistake, but not so deferential that we're mowed over. And I think
Right.
a lot of leaders struggle with it. And some of the strongest leaders I've seen are the ones they're so confident they can be absolutely vulnerable. And that vulnerability actually boosts their confidence. It's like this self-perpetuating machine. And I've seen it honestly more with women leaders than I have with men. That balance is there between that confidence and that humility. And I think that's what we all struggle with. Um, Again, 30 years ago, a lot of leaders developed their confidence by being competent. They knew everybody's job.
Yeah.
They came up through the ranks. These days, the chances are you're going to lead a team where you don't know everybody's job better than they do.
Right.
And so,
And then that's okay.
yeah, well, you have
Right.
to be humble enough to say, look, I don't know IT. I don't know finance. I don't know
Right.
HR, but I don't know accounting, but I do know product management, or I do know marketing, or I do know operations. But you're not going to know everything, especially the higher up you go. And I think that's a struggle for a lot of people. And I think the other
Right.
one is really figuring out, um, the big takeaway on the crucible expeditions we lead is, you've got to slow down to speed up. I think
Hmm.
that's the other thing is realizing that many of us are addicted to busy. None of us are paid to be busy. And sometimes we
We
got,
are addicted to busy.
yeah. And
Yeah. Always.
we got to sit up on the hill once in a while and
Right.
figure and reflect, rejuvenate, and figure out what we need to do.
Yeah. And as you were talking through, some of those humility, though, how important it is versus confidence and having both. It reminded me of somebody I was working with not that long ago,
Mm,
but the company was experiencing turnover of huge, huge amounts, like over 50%, 75%. Somebody was coming in the door, somebody was walking out the door. And the owner said at one point, "Why do we continue to hire stupid people?"
mm.
And I thought, well,
Yeah.
we need to take a look in the mirror. we're we've got an issue here, and it
Yeah.
doesn't have anything to do with the people that we're hiring.
Well, yeah.
So in a situation like that, Jan, what would be your first reaction? Because that
Well,
happens. I mean, that
I
situation was not unique to me. That's out there.
I mean, it goes back. I mean, well, I have seen that, where people think everybody that works for them are, stupid,
Yeah,
and they're the smartest people in the room.
right.
And those are people that, I have worked for and I chose to leave
And they're
because,
not coachable.
yeah, and I've seen them be successful by, measures of earning money, selling companies for a lot of money. There's books about people like that
Oh my goodness.
that have been
Priorities are skewed.
successful, but they haven't been kind and lifted people
Yeah.
up and
And it
and all.
depends on how you define success,
Exactly.
right? Are we
Well,
just defining success by the
well,
bottom line or the
well, when we
checkbook?
asked Professor Pfeffer from Stanford, how he defined leadership, he said it depends on the company. What's the company need? Some companies want that and some companies don't. But I think the best companies, by my definitions of success, are really great at selecting the right people, not the best people, the right people for that company. They're really great at welcoming them and onboarding them and helping them understand the values and the history of the organization. And then they invest in them from a development perspective. And by invest, I don't necessarily mean dollars. I mean the manager's time.
Right.
Um,
So they feel
the,
like they're part of the team.
right.
They were hired for a reason.
Yeah.
They're not just there to fill
Yeah.
an empty seat.
And one of my mentors, besides the crucible, the two big quotes I think are the best quotes for leaders. One, you have to slow down to speed up. The other one, taught to me by a mentor, was people support what they help create. So as leaders, in the business world, there's no such thing that I've seen of a business that's a democracy. But in an organization where everybody gets a voice, even though they don't all get a vote, I think is a healthy place. And again, you can't have that sort of place if the leader isn't humble enough to say, I want to hear from people. I might be wrong. I might be misinformed. I might have made bad assumptions, but my people are not stupid. Um,
Absolutely.
they might be motivated differently. They might not have the same ambition as some of the executives to take on those responsibilities. And again, they might place a higher priority on having more balance in their life than what it would take to be an executive.
But you
But
don't
that
know
doesn't
unless you
mean they're,
start developing that relationship with them,
yeah,
right? Yeah.
yeah. Well, I'm seeing more and more. I mean, really, a lot of veterans I've helped transition that were really high flying, career guys and gals, and then they decide to leave the military. And part of it is they don't want to work crazy. They don't want to do what it takes to be a general. They don't want to get in the business world and do what it takes to be a CEO because they want more balance in their life. And whenever somebody tells me, they want to be in the C-suite or a CEO, I kind of go through and I say, are you willing to pay what it will cost?
Yeah.
And then
Here's
we
what
look
it's going
at,
to take.
well, we look at
Yeah.
their values, like,
Right.
you know, um, because when you take on more responsibility, you have to sacrifice more. And are you willing to make those sacrifices? And again, there's no right or wrong answer. It depends on the person. Um, you know,
Do with their life and what they feel their purpose is and how they're going to get
yeah.
there.
Well, some
Absolutely.
people could say, I want to set a good example for my kids, and some people could say, I want to be with my kids all the time. And I mean, it just depends on what you value, and
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
no right or wrong.
Absolutely. So, have there been, as you reflect back on your career, have there been any critical moments that have really stood out that influenced who you are today? I mean, because you bring so much
Hmm.
wisdom to the table and you've impacted so many high
Well,
level people in a positive way. I've got to assume there have been some critical moments in your career that have really influenced you.
yeah, I think, it's a good question. It's a really good question. I think I've had a lot of bosses, and they kind of go into three buckets, bad bosses, okay bosses, and really great bosses. And luckily, I've had a lot of really great bosses. And I would say they're the ones, working with them is what influenced me the most and, my perspectives on things. And also a little bit on the bad bosses, the things I look back, I'm like, oh, that just wasn't right. I didn't care for that at all. Um, but with the bad bosses, I certainly made lots of mistakes, got on their bad side, let my pride and ego get in the way. As I look back, um, I don't, think they were good people, necessarily, but I do realize, boy, I could have managed myself in a way that would have produced different behavior from those bosses, ergo different results. So, again, when we're working with people that are difficult, we have to realize we cannot control them. We can control our own behavior, our own attitude that might change and influence their behavior differently. And, that's, what I've learned is, just getting sideways with people. And again, it was being immature. It was, having a lot of pride and ego and,
Yeah. Well,
you
I've
know,
been there myself. I get it.
yeah,
And, I've had bosses in all three buckets as well. As I think back and reflect on some of those experiences, it's how we're going to use that experience to learn from it and to make us better in the
yeah,
future. So,
yeah,
I mean, because we can all say, longer we're in our career, we can say we've had a good boss, bad boss, and okay boss. I mean, they're out there, but we have to learn from each experience. The good bosses, learn from them, learn as much as you can. The bad bosses, learn from them too,
yeah,
right? Learn what we don't want to do in the future.
yeah,
As my kids get older, they're, college age, and when one's already finished college and they're talking about their work situations, and their bosses, and I'd say, well, learn from it. Learn from it. Learn what
Yeah.
you want to do and what you think is right, and learn from what you think might not be the right way to handle a situation, and know that you're not going to do that in the future. So we got
That
to be able to be open to always learning.
I think that's the one thing that you don't learn in college. Um, and I've worked with a lot of young people is you can be right, but you can be right at the wrong time in the wrong way with the wrong person. And
Oh,
sometimes, I mean, it kind of goes back
absolutely.
to, what they taught us in the military, don't die on every hill, don't fall on your sword. Um, you got to figure out when you fight and when you just kind of say, I'm not fighting over this one. And again, that's pride and ego and being mature enough and smart enough to realize you're not going to right every wrong in the world. And,
That's right.
as again, to quote Jeffrey Pfeffer again, he reminds us, job one is to keep your job. And if you
Yeah.
tick off the boss, you have no influence to get resources and clear obstacles for your people.
You
If you
just
if
created a
if
great
you have a
risk for yourself.
yeah, I mean, yeah, you don't have a good relationship with somebody in the organization, you can't take care of your people.
Right.
So that's the hard thing is, and again, if there's so many wrongs, then we have to look in the mirror and say, hey, is this organization's values line up with mine? And if not,
Yeah.
then I need to go.
Right. There's probably a better situation for me out there.
Yep.
So, Jan, you've dropped many good nuggets for our
Mm,
listeners today. Any other like high key words of wisdom that you may have for somebody coming
yeah.
into a leadership role?
Well, self-reliant leadership means, that you have personal responsibility for your development. Nobody else. You might have a vessel in which, you can really learn and grow, and the company makes real dollar investments in you through
Hmm.
courses, but ultimately it's up to you. And as it's been said, the only way you're going to be different at the end of 2024 is the people you meet and the books you read or the podcasts you listen to.
Yeah.
It's what you put in your head and who you associate with. But the other thing I would throw out there is, if you're early in your career and you really want to become more self-aware, is to keep a journal. And it doesn't have to be dear diary, here's how I feel. It could be four things is to start with and go from there. One,
Oh, I love that. That's
yeah.
great.
Well, one, rate the day. Was a good day,
Hmm.
bad day, scale 1 to 10. Just rate the day. Two, what did you learn? Three, what are you grateful for? And four, what's the priority for tomorrow? And if you do that for a month, look back and look, what did the good days have in common? What did the bad days have in common? What's the theme of what you're focused on learning? Are the priorities getting solved, or is the same priority keep showing up? And is the little
Yeah.
bit of gratitude that you're putting in there, making you a little bit more humble and grateful and happier?
Well, I
And
love that.
if you
I love
start with
that.
that, again, it takes, 2 minutes at the end of a day. And then after a month, you go back and coach yourself
Right.
and figure out what you want to do. And again, just remember, we are all in transition in some way, shape, or form. I mean, so,
Always. Right.
and, and that, a good life isn't something that is in the future. You have to figure out how to live a good life today.
Today. Right.
And,
Tomorrow will
and
be better, but today's good.
yeah,
Today
but
can be great.
I mean, you've got to say, what's a good life? And again, I mean, going to work every day and being miserable is not a good life. Um, I mean,
For
you're not gonna,
sure.
if you're like, well, I gotta earn money for the kids and the mortgage. It's like, well, you're setting a really rotten example if you're in a bad mood every night.
No.
Um, so,
They're not seeing the best
things,
you.
yeah, one of the things I think about, the outputs of effective coaching or effective leadership is that the people you touch every day, they go home at night good tired, that they have a nice conversation at the dinner table with their family and they're in a good mood. They might be tired, but they're good tired. And everybody they work with is the same. Nobody's going home in a bad mood, ticked off, feel like they're underappreciated, any of that stuff. And I think if we're leading effectively, that's what we're doing. And then, in the morning, hopefully more often than not, people say, I get to instead of I have to.
Have to. Yeah. Perfect. Perfect. Jan, have there been any game changers in your life? Anybody that has really influenced you to help you grow and become the person that you are today?
Oh yeah. I've been
Sticking with
real.
the theme of game changers here, but
Yeah.
I'm sure you've had a few
Oh
influential
yeah. I've
people
had
in
a
your
lot of
life.
mentors. I've had a lot of mentors. It's kind of, I heard an interview with Dick Van Dyke the other day, and he was saying, oh, all my friends are gone. So I've had to make new friends. Well, a lot, as I look back, um, gosh, I would say half my mentors have passed away. They were quite a bit older than me, and they're gone. But I think about them and I channel them. Um, and who knows who coached and mentored them, but I think it's, the best of our ancestors that kind of comes forward, and we just keep passing that along. And yeah, but again, I've been really fortunate. I've had a lot of good mentors, and at a certain point in your career, you realize that you've got to mentor other people. And
Yes, yes.
you sort of have that obligation to pass along all that help. And again, um, you know, I mentioned solopreneur at the beginning, and I have this company, but if I count all the people that contribute to this organization, whether they're paid or not paid, or they're 1099 people that coach with me, um, gosh, it's probably 30 or 40 people that I, work with throughout the year that help bring everything that I do to bear. But they're not employees.
Right.
Um, but I could just start listing off all the people that I count on, and, hopefully count on me, to bring to bear what
You
we do.
bet. Yeah.
Um,
Well, we can't do this all by ourselves,
no,
right? I
not
mean,
even
we
close.
no. I mean, we have to have our own support system, and we have to have our own coach or coaches to help us uh, improve and grow and learn. And I mean, it's if when I hear somebody say, "Well, I don't need a coach. I can do this. I can do everything on my own." I think, well, you know, probably not. I appreciate your level of confidence, but there's also something to be said for being
No,
humble enough to know that we can't do this all on our own
no.
because we can't.
Well, that's the funny thing about coaching is, as you and I both know, I mean, 20 years ago, it wasn't really a thriving industry. People didn't go outside for coaches. But again, 30 years ago, what happened was managers were managers. They weren't player coaches. And there was a lot of time and money invested in helping the managers really figure out how to interview, how to coach, how to counsel, how to performance manage it, how to promote. And I remember more than a few bosses saying, the metric by which I should be judged is how many people underneath me get promoted.
I love
You
that.
don't hear that.
Yes.
You don't hear that very much. And so, everybody's busy. And
Hmm.
so, outside coaches are convenient, they're necessary, they're helpful. But, part of it is I think, we don't necessarily have the structure the best way in a lot of organizations where
It's
we know that what the top leaders are doing is absolutely cascading down throughout the organization.
true. Perfect. Jan, this has been wonderful. You've educated our listeners tremendously. I want to have one more question, make it a fun one.
Okay.
And so here we go. You have just been hired as an executive coach for some of the senior elected representatives in Washington. So how would you approach that engagement and what would be on your agenda?
It's a good question. And I
And
remember
we do not need to get into politics at
I
all, but
won't, I never do politics or religion on our
yep,
podcast, but I
yep.
remember having the Colorado Speaker of the House in my classroom once when I was teaching MBA students. And, and I remember he was raised, his parents, one was a Democrat, one was a Republican, and he was a very effective speaker. And he said, what I always start when I'm working bipartisan is I try to figure out what can we all agree on. And there's some great books by Jonathan Haidt on, why we can't agree on politics and religion. And he has moral foundation theory that we all
Hmm.
start in the same place. So what I would
You
do
bet.
is I would go back to those morals. And I would say, we all start in the same place. We all want the same thing for our country.
Yeah,
Um, let's figure out how we can get there. And it would be nice if people realize that the only way we're going to get there is compromise. And you can't compromise if you don't care to understand where people are coming from. And again, I believe we're all coming from the same place. There,
I believe we are too, but somehow we're struggling to get to the
oh yeah, but
end
it would
result.
be it would be a good it would be a good assignment. I think it would be very frustrating and very difficult. But
I think you'd
boy,
have to have a lot of patience.
yeah. Well, I mean, we're all looking for the leader that's going to unify us, and I don't know if that person exists.
Well,
You know,
and somebody humble enough to accept some suggestions and, ways that possibly we can improve. I mean,
yeah.
there has to be that humility there, and they have to open themselves
Mm.
up to make things happen in the right way and to grow and improve. And I don't know. It's a fun question because I love to think about, well, what would I have on my agenda? Gosh, I don't, I have to really give that some thought, but
Yep.
there's so many
Well,
opportunities there.
well, if you really want to be fun with it, I think right now the person I think that is the least polarizing person in the country right now, so maybe she could do it, would be
Hear it.
Taylor Swift. So
Yes. Yeah.
I don't know
You know,
anybody that doesn't like Taylor Swift, so maybe
I,
she could fix things.
I saw a license plate the other day and it said Swifties, Swiftea. And I thought, well, is that person, they're like tea or, I mean, I was so clueless. I had
Yeah.
no idea. And my wife had to say, no, Jeff, they're a Taylor Swift fan. They're called Swifties. Like,
Yeah.
oh,
Oh, you didn't know that, Jeff, huh?
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I was clueless. So, Jan, thank you so much for taking time today. This has been great discussion. How do people learn about you and self-reliant leadership?
Self-reliantleadership.com. Or, look me up on LinkedIn. Pretty easy to find. And the website's got tons and tons of resources. And if you've got any particular questions, let me know. And on our podcast, I think we've covered just about every leadership issue over the last 7+ years. So oftentimes people reach out and say, "Hey, I'm dealing with this. I'd love for my team to listen to a relevant podcast," and I'll refer them to one. So again, I appreciate, the work that you do, Jeff, the questions you ask, very thoughtful, and thank you for having me on.
You bet. It's been great conversation. I know you helped our listeners become much wiser in the process. I always try to have at least a couple of nuggets dropped during each episode, so somebody listening will walk away and say, "Wow, I feel like I got something out of that." There's absolutely no way somebody would walk away from this episode and think, "Well, I didn't learn anything." There
Yeah.
was so much to learn. So thank you again, Jan,
Uh,
for taking the time,
All right,
and I
Jeff.
appreciate you so much and all the work that you've done.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And
Happy
and
holidays.
listen, happy holidays, absolutely. Oh, well, so before I let you go quickly, any big plans for 2024? I know the book is coming out, but
The book's coming out. We got a big sabbatical we're going to take, and
great.
just lots of travel.
Good for you. Good. Wonderful. Well, again, thanks for being here, Jan. The best to you in 2024. Listeners, thank you so much for tuning in to Game Changers. Today has been a great day for sure. And I know tomorrow is going to be even better. I just know it.
Hmm.
Peace, everyone.